this lecture, we're going to be looking at the functionalist theory of crime. Now, for this theory, we're going to be breaking it down into two sections. The first section is we're going to be looking at the function that crime plays in society. So its role within society to maintain society and why it exists in society. The next section is going to be looking at the causes of crime in society. So the functionalists not only say that crime has a role to play in society, but they are also trying to explain why some people commit crime whereas others don't. But we'll start with the functions of crime and then go on to the causes of crime. And it's important that when you're looking at an essay on this that you can see or check, I should say, whether the question is asking you about the role of crime or the cause of crime or both. So when we're looking at the causes, the functions of crime, Durkheim says that crime is inevitable, that every society throughout history, throughout the world, there is an element of crime. And it is actually necessary in order for society to function and to exist that there is a certain amount of crime. But what he also says is that there is a limit. If you have too much crime, you end up in a state of anomie, of normallessness, lovely word, where people don't know what is right and wrong or what is and is not acceptable. But on the other end of the spectrum, if you don't have any crime at all, you get stagnation. And when there's stagnation in society, society will die. There needs to be change, but that change should be slow and steady rather than rapid and causing even more anomie. Now, we have seen this connection between anomie and criminality in history. A good example is the 1960s and 70s. There was a lot of rapid change in this period of time, which led to a state of anomie, but the crime rates were also very, very high. And it's an era of the rise of the serial killer, where you see a lot more serial killers coming to prominence. And it's not to say that they didn't exist beforehand, maybe there are other factors here, but during the 1960s, during a time of high crime and a rapidly changing society, we see this anomic state. So Durkheim saying that crime is inevitable and crime has a role to play in society, let's look at what he actually said was the role that crime plays. So he referred to these as the positive functions of crime. So first of all, he talks about how it reminds people of what is right and wrong within society, what he calls boundary maintenance. And we see this through the publication of court records. I don't know if they still do this, but newspapers used to publish the findings of magistrate court cases in their newspapers, usually on a Friday, to remind people that this behaviour that landed this person in court is not acceptable. And as a result, this is the punishment that they received. It's a way of reminding us of the norms and values of society. And this an example of where crime has done this was the 2011 London riots. And they're called London riots, but they were actually more widespread than that, where the people who were involved in this, who were charged with crimes from this, including looting, property damage, etc., were named and shamed in the media. Now, some of these people have no one to blame but themselves, because they did, in fact, boast about their looting on social media, and strangely enough, the police then went round to see them and arrest them. But this publication of criminality, whether it be through the publication of court records or newspaper articles or news pieces, will remind people that this behaviour is not acceptable, hence the boundary maintenance. The second example, or second positive function, is to maintain social cohesion. And what Durkheim says here is that crime helps people to come together, whether it be in large numbers or small numbers, but it can create a sense of condemnation in the criminal and sympathy for the victims, which can bring people together. This can be exemplified in a number of ways where we've seen, for example, the Manchester bombings in 2017, where people came together to condemn the terrorists that set off a bomb at the Ariana Grande concert, and also the murder of MP Joe Cox in 2016, who was stabbed at a constituency breakfast by a white nationalist Europe Brexit pro-Brexit person, and it brought loads of people, it brought communities together in condemnation of these acts. And finally, we have the adaptation and change. Now, as I've already said, Durkheim said that stagnant society is basically a dead society. So change needs to occur. And it's through criminal activity that we can see crimes happening, not crimes happening, we can see change happening, because it can highlight a problem in society that needs to be addressed, and or changes in society that perhaps require legal changes. And an example here is the suffragettes in their Votes for Women campaign, where they engaged in criminal activities such as chaining themselves to fences and disrupting, I think it was the Grand National, but it might have been another horse race, but causing disruption to get their message out there that there needed to be a change. And there was change. So the Votes for Women Act went through, enfranchisement for women in terms of their political rights occurred. Now, there is a little bit of contention as to whether the suffragettes were more influential in getting this change, or the suffragists who were working within the law. But we can see through criminal activity, people can affect change. We've also got the work of Davis, who argued that one of the functions that crime plays in society is that it acts as a safety valve, which prevents greater and more deviant behaviour from occurring. So by engaging in minor deviance prevents criminal activity, is what he's essentially saying. So it's not that we're allowing criminal activity to take place, but this low-level deviancy allows a release for urges, a release for a sort of catharsis, if you like, which then prevents the escalation into more serious criminal activity. And then we have Clinard and Cohen. Now, they didn't work together on this, they worked separately on this, so that's why there is a slash rather than a and. But Clinard and Cohen both said that crime, and this links into the adaptation and change that we were talking about, that crime can act as a way of alerting society that there is something wrong, that something in society is not working correctly. So this links back a little bit to Parsons' organic analogy, where for a healthy person, for somebody to be healthy, all of their organs are working and doing what they're supposed to do. Now, in order for society to be healthy, you need to have all these social institutions and social structures working together to create a healthy society. So crime can be an indicator that one of those social institutions or social structures is not working correctly. And that can then lead to criminal behavior. For example, an increase in teen pregnancy could indicate a change is needed in the education system or the health system. But it's important to note that with both of these, they see it as an alert system, if you like. Okay, but obviously this is not the answer, so we need to evaluate these. First of all, as functionalism is a structural approach, it tends to look at the big picture, the benefits for society, and is therefore ignoring the victims. And it's unlikely that a victim of crime is going to go, yeah, it's okay, it's fine, because this is for the benefit of society. And even families of victims, particularly if they've been killed or something like that, they're not going to see this as a positive thing for society because it's a very negative experience for them. And this theory is slightly contradictory in the sense that functionalism is a positivist approach and it's all about quantification and measurement. And Durkheim's idea of crime being beneficial to a certain extent before it becomes anomie, or not enough where it becomes stagnation, he doesn't quantify this. He doesn't tell us how much crime is beneficial in society. What's the delineation point of crime being beneficial and crime being too much or too little? We also need to consider the fact that crime can lead to ostracization and isolation rather than cohesion. Now, we said that a victim of crime can be supported in terms of society coming together to support the victim. But in some cases, these victims are ostracized and isolated, particularly those who may be victims of a sex crime. They may find that they are seen as broken by society and therefore ostracized by it. And of course, criminals, when they come out of prison having served their sentences for being for the crimes that they've committed, they're not exactly welcomed back with opening arms. They can find difficulty getting a job, getting housing, because they do need to declare that they have a criminal record and that they have served a sentence. So instead of bringing society together, crime can actually force it apart. And finally, Marxists would argue that the benefits that the functionalists are pointing out only actually benefit the rich and powerful, because they're the ones who can manipulate the law to their benefit. So the benefits of things like boundary maintenance and social cohesion, these are to maintain a capitalist society. And as we know with the Marxists, they do not like capitalist society. So they won't see crime as being beneficial, just a symptom of the capitalist society, which we'll look at in a later lecture. So there are benefits to having crime in society. As we've seen, we're not clear on how much is good and how much is too much or how much is not enough. And it is very much a macro view, ignoring the individuals. So what causes crime according to the functionalist? So here we're looking at what it is that leads to people to commit criminal activity. And there are three theories we're going to look at. We're going to look at strain theory, which is the work of Merton. We're going to look at subcultural theories, and we're going to look at bond theory by Hershey. Now, bond theory isn't technically functionalism. It is functionalist adjacent. So I'm including it in this lecture, but it could be on its own as well. So let's start off looking at strain theory. So Merton based his theory of crime on the concept of the American dream. He was writing in the 1950s when it was all about the white picket fence, the family, the home, and he argued that there was a consensus about what people believed they should be aiming for in life, what he referred to as the goals. We've come across this idea before when we talk about social values and value consensus. And he also said that society gives us a suggestion on the appropriate ways to achieve the goals for being considered successful in society. And he believed that generally we're told that if we want to achieve the goals of the white picket fence, family, house, material goods, and things like that, we need to work hard for them. We need to get a job, get a good education, and work for them. That we shouldn't be expected to be given these things. And crime occurs when there is unequal access between the goals and the means. And he refers to this as strain, hence strain theory. So when people are trying to achieve the goals, but the means aren't available to them, they may turn to crime. And he said that there were 5 responses to this strain. That everybody feels this strain, but it's how they respond to that feeling of strain that determines criminal and non-criminal behaviour. So he said, first of all, you have the conformity. And these are people who accept the social goals, so accept that they should be aiming for certain things in society, and they also accept the means to achieve those goals, and ultimately believe that they will achieve those goals, that they will get their white picket fence, house, dog, on all the rest of it. So they conform to societal expectation. And this doesn't lead to criminal behaviour. The next we've got is innovation. And these are the people who want the things that society tells them they should want, the house, the white picket fence, the dog, and all the rest of it, but they reject the way society tells us we should be achieving those goals. And they create their own. So it's not guaranteed that somebody who is an innovator will turn to criminal enterprise, but it's possible that they could turn to criminal enterprise in order to achieve the goals that society has set for them. Next up is the ritualists. These are the people who accept the means but reject the goals. And it's not that they're rejecting them outright. They're kind of like, oh, they'd be nice, but they're accepting the fact that they're unlikely to achieve those goals. So they are people who accept that society says that this is what I need to do to be successful, but I'm never going to get that. I'm never going to be able to buy my own house or have a family or all of those things, despite the fact that I am going to do everything that society tells me I should do. So they're going through the motions, but accepting that they may not reach the end. And again, this like conformity is unlikely to lead to criminal behaviour. Finally, we have retreatism for this particular section, and I'll come on to the next one in a minute. But retreatists are people who both reject and the goals and the means. So they're saying, I don't want what society is telling me I should want, and I don't want to do the things society tells me what to do, so I'm not going to do them. But they don't create new goals or means. They're just kind of like, nope, not doing it. So the retreatists are people who tend to be on the fringes of society, the homeless, drug addicts, people like that, who are choosing or are marginalized to a point where they have kind of said, well, you don't want me, so why am I going to follow your rules, kind of thing. And again, this can lead to criminal activity because why it is that view of why should I follow the rules that you set down when you don't want me? Okay. And the final one is the rebellion or rebels. And these are people who, like the retreatists, reject the social goals and means that society have set out for them. But the difference here is they set their own rules. So they still have goals and they still have ways of achieving those goals, but they've created them for themselves rather than following on from social norms. And again, this could lead to criminal enterprise. So conformity and ritualism doesn't lead, as a response to this strain, doesn't lead to criminal activity, but innovation, retreatism, and rebellion could lead to criminal activity. Not guaranteed, it's not a self-fulfilling prophecy, but it could lead to criminal activity. But obviously, this is not the solution. If we had the answer, then we'd be able to do more than we currently do in terms of dealing with criminality. So what we need to look at is the criticisms. Now, the first one is it is deterministic. The theory suggests that it's not the individual choice that leads to criminal behaviour, but external factors which are leading to criminal behaviour. In this case, the strain of trying to achieve socially approved goals in a socially approved way. And this, in a way, takes some responsibility away from the criminal. It's saying, it's not my fault, society made me this way. And kind of gives them an out, if you like. It removes their personal choice and personal responsibility for their own actions. Secondly, it does ignore white collar crime. It's talking about crime that is street level. Blue collar crime is what Merton was focused on in terms of his study. Now we can, to a certain extent, apply this theory to white collar crime as well, because even if you have achieved the goals, you may still feel strained for more. We do live in a capitalist society after all. It's also assuming that there is a value consensus. It's saying that we all want the same things, that we all want the white picket fence, the house, the dog, and all the family and all of that. And that's not necessarily the case. We live in a very diverse society, which shows that we do not have a value consensus in society. Not everyone wants to own their own house and have a family and all of those things. Society has moved on from there. We also have to take into account that it doesn't explain non-utilitarian crime. So when we're talking about utilitarian and non-utilitarian, utilitarian crime is crime for financial or material gain. And there are crimes where there is no financial or material gain. Domestic violence, for example, or rape. These crimes do not have a financial gain from them or a material gain. Murder, that one's tricky because there is murder for life insurance policies and things like that. But what happens when there isn't that material gain? That it's not going to help you achieve the goals that society has set out for you. This theory, therefore, doesn't apply. And finally, it lacks explanation. It doesn't tell us why some people choose certain paths or certain responses to strain. It just says that these are the responses. So it doesn't really explain why. It just almost gives us a what. The next theory we're going to look at is subcultural theories. And subcultural theories do help us to explain more of the non-utilitarian crimes such as vandalism and joyriding, which strain theory doesn't really explain. It sees deviance as a collective response to marginalization. So when people feel marginalized, they are likely to form a subculture to find a sense of belonging. And the first one we're going to look at, which we can link to crime, is status frustration. Now you may have remembered this from your study of education, that status frustration is about feeling a sense of popularity or status within your social group. Now Cohen argues, and this one's Albert Cohen, argues that subcultures emerge when people are denied status in society. And Cohen used working class boys to illustrate this. And so we have seen, he's kind of taken what we've seen in education and applied it to crime. So he said that working class boys are unable to gain status in a middle class world due to not having the means to success. So you can see how this links in with Merton's strain theory. And because of this sense of frustration, status frustration, which gives them a sense of personal failure and inadequacy, they may react to this in a criminal way. And by rejecting socially acceptable values and patterns of behavior. So, and when you get several boys feeling this way, they form that subculture by banding together and getting that status from behaving in an antisocial way. So status frustration particularly can help us to explain things like vandalism and criminal damage, more so than strain theory, because these can be outlets for that frustration. We then have Cloward and Olin, who talk about illegitimate opportunity structures. And they try to explain why different subcultures emerge in different regions. And they suggest that the illegitimate opportunity structures affect the type of subculture that emerges in response to status frustration. That the varied social circumstances in which working class youth live give rise to three types of delinquent subculture. Firstly, there is the criminal subculture, which is categorized by utilitarian crimes such as theft or anything that's going to get them material or financial gain. They develop in a more stable working class area where there is already an established pattern of crime. So there is an element of socialization here. These areas, these established criminal groups, provide learning opportunities and a career structure for an aspiring young criminal and an alternative to a legitimate job in the world, a kind of a legal job, if you like, and usually achieving far greater financial rewards from the criminal enterprise than they would get from having a normal job, if you like. Adult criminals exercise the social control over the younger criminals, stop them carrying out delinquent acts such as vandalism and criminal damage, which would attract attention from the police. The second subculture is a conflict subculture, and this emerges in a socially disorganized area where there is high population turnover and a lack of social cohesion. In a conflict subculture, both approved and illegal means of achieving mainstream goals are blocked or limited, meaning that people may not be able to get a legitimate job that gets them beyond the poverty line, and young people express their frustration through violence and street crime, and at least obtain status and success through peer group values. So here you're more likely to see those more gangs rather than organized criminality. And finally, get the retreatist subcultures, who emerge among those who consider themselves double failures. They failed to succeed in the mainstream society, and they failed to succeed in the criminal and conflict society, or the gang cultures that we've talked about above. The response to this is then to retreat into drug addiction, alcoholism, homelessness, paid for through petty theft, shoplifting, and likely prostitution. So they're kind of seeing their marginalization leading them into criminal activity. The final subcultural theory comes from Miller, and this is focal concerns theory. Miller suggests that the working class are socialized into a number of distinct values that together meant that they were more likely than others to engage in criminal or delinquent behavior. Miller described these values as focal concerns, and in the working class, these focal concerns include excitement, toughness, street smarts, wit, independence, and fatalism. And this, again, giving you a link back, this kind of links in with Sugarman's ideas of working class habitus. But these values on their own don't mean that crime is inevitable, but they do make crime more likely. Remember, there is still a a sense of agency in somebody as to whether or not they fall into criminal behavior. But behaviors such as seeking excitement, toughness, smartness, and things like that may lead to situations where a person feels or falls into criminal activity. So it might lead to fighting or criminal damage in some way. Miller states that autonomy might lead to people taking matters into their own hands rather than asking for help, meaning that they are a victim themselves, and rather than going to the police, they decide to deal with it themselves, which can escalate the situation. So again, these focal concerns aren't necessarily a guarantee of criminal activity, but they're more likely to give rise to situations where criminality will occur. However, as with all theories, there are criticisms. Firstly, the status frustration idea can be criticised because it focuses on youth delinquency, and in particular male delinquency. Therefore, it's not explaining female deviancy or criminality later on in life. Additionally, Willis's study Learning to Labour points out that working class boys do not share the same ideas of status as middle class boys, so may not create that sense of status frustration that Cohen was suggesting they feel. When we look at Clinard and Cohen and their theory of, again, it can be criticised for their methodology because their whole theory relies on official statistics and appears to accept them without any form of critical analysis. They appear to over-exaggerate the criminal opportunities that are available to young people, and again, they are focusing mostly on youth crime, so don't explain the criminality in those who are older or who are female. Miller's focal concerns can be criticised by Matzer. Matzer argues that membership to subcultures is often short-lived, and many young people who may be delinquent in their youth go on to live law-abiding adult lives. That by mid-20s, when they start settling down, having families, they move away from those delinquent and criminal activities and criminal behaviours for more legitimate ones because they have more to lose. And that brings us on to our next theory, which is bond theory. Now, bond theory is different to the other theories that were covered because Hershey wasn't necessarily looking at why people commit crime. He's looking at why people don't commit crime. What is it that stops someone from committing crime? What keeps their behavior in check? And Hershey argued that criminal activities occur when people's attachments to society or their bonds to society are weakened. And it's these bonds which he identified as commitment, belief, involvement, and attachment that bind us together and prevent criminal activity. And what he means by this, so attachment is the extent to which we care about what other people think about us. So we are less likely to commit crime if we care what others think, because criminal activity is seen as a bad thing. People don't like criminals. Commitments referring to our personal investments that we make for our own lives. What have we got to lose if we commit crime? So this links back to what I was saying about Matzer and delinquency, subcultures being short-lived. Once we get older, we have more to lose. We have family, we have our homes, so we're less likely to commit crime. The next one, involvement, is talking about how busy we are. Is there time and space for law breaking and deviant behavior? The busier we are, the less likely we are to commit crime. The more involved we are in our society, the less likely we are to commit crime because we don't have time to. And finally, belief. How strong is a person's sense that they should obey the rules of society? So linking into socialization. The greater our belief that society's norms and values are correct, the less likely we are to commit crime. So the greater the attachment to our society, the greater each of these bonds that we have to society are, the more likely we are to remain law abiding. However, and there's always a however, one of the biggest weaknesses of bond theory is Hershey doesn't explain why some people have strong bonds and some people have weak. He says that this is what happens, but he doesn't tell us how we get there. And he also can be criticized by the fact that there are criminals who do have strong bonds. For example, Dr. Harold Shipman and Illinois Governor Ron Balakovich can be used as an example here. Both had very strong links to the community and society as a whole, but still went on to commit crimes. Dr. Harold Shipman was a local GP. He was well respected within his community, and yet he's suspected of killing over 200 people. Governor Balakovich, again, he was an elected official. He had good standing in his community. He had his entire career to lose, and yet he did engage in criminal activity by taking bribes and committing fraud. Hershey also doesn't explain the existence of why there are so many different crimes. He says that there are lots he explains what causes crime, but what causes the different types of crime? Why do some people murder? Why do some people commit criminal damage? Why are some people involved in sex crimes? So he's kind of giving us a half an explanation, if you like. And finally, it's the assumption that we all are bad, that we are born bad, and it's society that stops us from committing crime. Now, so it's that kind of, without society, we'd all be going around doing horrible things. And there is actually no way to test this. That would be massively unethical and quite dangerous to do. So it's a question that we can't really answer as to if without society would we all just be doing whatever we liked. So that brings us to the end of this lecture on crime, functionalist theory of crime. So we've talked through the 3 positive functions according to Durkheim, as well as those put forward by Davis and Clinard and Cohen. We've talked about the different causes of crime in the terms of strain theory, functionalist subcultures, and Hershey's bond theory.